This week, we're foregoing some right-brain poetry for left-brain science, GMOs and the science of nature versus the science of genetically engineering it. Next up, Grayson Earle illuminates messages of socio-political change using technology. And finally, technology used for evil inside the prison industrial complex. Welcome to Act Out. I'm Eleanor Goldfield, and this is your tipping point. GMOs, genetically modified organisms. The battle for unfucked with food rages on, and before we head to the front lines of this fight, let me just take a moment to dig into the science. And also some controversy, because GMOs have garnered support from science heavyweights like Neil deGrasse Tyson, the American Association for Advancement of Science, the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, and others. Meanwhile, organizations like the Union of Concerned Scientists, the Global Research Institute, the Council for Responsible Genetics, and scientists such as Vandana Shiva, who was named one of the 7 most powerful women in the world, and Dr. Gilles-Éric Seralini, the first scientist to do a long-term GMO toxicity study not sponsored and funded by the corporations themselves, and many others are all against GMOs. And unlike climate change, the scientific community isn't 97% on board with this one. Why? Why is this such a splintered subject? Well, as Sheldon Krimsky, the nation's leading advocate of ethics and science, puts it, the real and potentially adverse effects of GMOs have been understated or negated by many in the scientific community who accept uncritically a corporate-crafted message. A fair-minded and unbiased individual looking at all of the evidence must reach the conclusion that there is a great deal that we do not know, and what we do know impels us to be both cautious and concerned, skeptical of an early manufactured consensus and critical of a framing that fails to recognize the diversity of public objections to GMOs. A bit like the egg debate. Are they good? Are they bad? Who knows? But unlike the egg debate, we don't have a lot of independent studies on GMOs. In fact, the aforementioned Dr. Seralini is the first person to lead a team in an independent study on the toxicity of GMOs. And he released his findings in 2012, more than 2 decades after GMOs started commercially appearing in the marketplace. What Seralini and his team did was take a 2004 Monsanto study of NK603 maize, one of Monsanto's GMO corn crops. And while the experiment was based on the same protocol as the Monsanto study, Seralini's team tested more parameters more frequently and for a longer period of time. Instead of the 90 days in the Monsanto study, Seralini's rats were tested for their full 2-year lifespan. And that last detail proved critical. The first tumors only appeared 4 to 7 months into the study. In industry's earlier 90-day study on the same GMO maize, Monsanto NK603, signs of toxicity were seen but were dismissed as, quote, not biologically meaningful by industry and European Food Safety Administration, EFSA, alike. It seems that they were indeed very biologically meaningful. The Seralini study findings go on to show that all the female rats who were fed GMO corn died 2 to 3 times faster than the control group rats who weren't on GMOs. And that difference was seen in 3 male rat groups. Females developed large mammary and pituitary tumors. Hormone balances were completely thrown off, while males experienced liver congestions and necrosis. And before you say, well, that certainly does suck for that rat family, but I'm not a fucking rat, that is true. However, rats, mice, and indeed other rodents as well are widely used in scientific testing because, quote, their genetic, biological, and behavior characteristics closely resemble those of humans. And many symptoms of human conditions can be replicated in mice and rats. So, now that that argument is cleared up, let's get back to the study. And I should perhaps also mention that Seralini had to work his ass off just to be able to do this study. In order to replicate the study, Seralini had to, of course, obtain the original study from Monsanto, which is about as easy and enjoyable as trying to extract your hand from the jaws of an embittered crocodile. And yet, he did. And not only did he do that, he then published his findings post-peer review in a highly, highly respected international journal. The response? A series of US and corporate-backed cover-ups attempting to debunk his science in the name of Monsanto's science. Just a few weeks after Seralini released his findings, the EFSA released their own little press plug, claiming that GMOs are just fine, shut up, and go back to your life. In so many words. Corporate watchdog group, Corporate Europe Observer, summarily smelled a rat. Pun intended. After doing a little bit of their own digging, they found that, quote, over half of the scientists involved in the GMO panel, which positively reviewed the Monsanto's study for GMO maize in 2009, leading to its EU-wide authorization, had conflicts of interest with the biotech industry. And these conflicts ranged from receiving research funding from the biotech industry, being a member or collaborator in a pro-biotech industry association, to writing or reviewing industry-sponsored publications. Some conflicts revealed a conflict of scientific interests, with some panel members involved in working on the creation of transgenic plants, including potatoes, with antibiotic-resistant marker genes. Gosh, you know, that sounds really shady, and it sounds shady in the same way that meeting that happened in 1992 or something, where George Bush I met with top officials of Monsanto in a closed-door meeting, after which he gave GMO seeds the commercial green light and mandated that no government safety tests be conducted before the release. Now, why would he do that? Granted, that whole family seems to be allergic to science and, well, intelligence in general, but for the rest of the scientific community, why aren't such findings such as Seralini's at least taken into consideration when people call out their support for GMOs? I actually don't have an answer to that. I don't know. Could it be that people get stuck in the mire of good intentions? I mean, the concept of scientifically engineered drought-resistant crops that could feed millions sounds pretty fucking great. And so does being fit without exercise, but there's just no science to suggest that either one of those work. Indeed, the claim that GMOs result in higher crop yields is not true, because that was one of the original ideas. Hey, we'll create this drought-resistant, pesticide-resistant crop, and then everybody can eat more. World hunger solved. But no. A 2013 study showed evidence of what is known as yield drag, the idea that manipulating the genome of a plant variety causes unintended changes in the way that it grows, causing it to be actually less productive. And furthermore, soils managed with organic methods have shown better water holding capacity and water infiltration rates and have produced higher yields than conventional systems under drought conditions and excessive rainfall. Oh, the irony. But I'm not done yet. How about the scientific claim that GMOs are good for the environment because they require less herbicides? The idea being that with GMO crops resistant to herbicides such as Roundup, aka glyphosate, you could spritz just, a smaller amount of weed killer on the crops, kill the weeds, and spare the crops. But that's not quite how it worked out. Beginning around 2000, weeds growing in Roundup-ready crops began to develop resistance to Roundup. And by 2011, 8 agriculturally important weeds in the U.S. had developed glyphosate resistance associated with Roundup-ready crops. So what does that mean? Well, it means that you have to spray more shit. Actually, an estimated 383 million pounds worth of shit. On top of this, some farmers are attempting to plow the problem out, resulting in increased soil erosion, thereby debunking the two main quote-unquote sustainability benefits for the Roundup-ready crops, which are lower overall use of herbicide and a reduction in soil erosion. And keep in mind that the soil erosion, now filled with millions of pounds more worth of glyphosate, brought to you by the makers of Agent Orange, are flowing into rivers, tributaries, seeping into groundwater, and of course, affecting crops that aren't supposed to be a part of the Roundup-ready system. And all this might explain why farmers used to dress like this, and now dress like this. Sorry, but if you have to get dressed like that to pick fucking crops, I think I'll just sit over here and gnaw on my fucking houseplant. But even with all of this, all of these red flags popping up like whack-a-moles on PCP, many anti-GMO activists are primarily after something so simple and far less controversial than an all-out ban. Labeling. I mean, arsenic is labeled arsenic, right? So, sugar-free. So if you see it, you know not to drink that shit. But GMO corporations and our government don't want us to know which veggies were plucked via hazmat suit, which logic, the friend of science, would consider to be silly if they could really stand by their own in-house funded experiments that show that GMOs are as safe for you as mother's milk. And an aside on that, lots of infant formula is GMO. Just a heads up. Furthermore, GMO companies and their cheerleaders claim that labels aren't needed because they'll just confuse consumers. Question. How the fuck is this confusing? If you don't think that this will confuse us, but that will, then you must think that we are the most intelligent dumb fucks ever to grace this topsy-turvy world. I can't even fucking say most of those words, and yet Big Ag thinks I'm intelligent enough to decide that yes, dipotassium phosphate is exactly what I want for dinner. But GMOs, I'm sorry, I'm so confused. I think I'll just starve. Fuck you. In the end, it's very, very clear that the industry is doing one hell of a job of covering up their own meager experiments while simultaneously spending tons of cash to ensure that no one else can perform studies, that governments close their eyes, open their mouths, and that consumers keep reading 4-syllable words but steer clear of 3-letter words for our own safety and happiness. And those are the facts as of today. And that's enough to make me anti-GMO. As someone who loves science, who respects the tenets of always questioning, always being open to learn and to adjust my own understanding of the world based on new findings, I am anti-GMO. And I will be until science can prove that I should bite into what these guys are harvesting. As Counterpunch reported late last year, as of now, GMOs do nothing for society but enlarge the coffers of the billion-dollar agrochemical giants who produce them. They have not alleviated hunger. They have not increased environmental sustainability. Their much-hyped public benefits have not yet materialized. To question their scientific and societal value and risk is decidedly scientific at its core. At the very least, the public has a right to know what is in the food they eat. Anything else would be an infringement on the rights of all U.S. citizens, and most of all, would be in and of itself anti-science. And that is why I will, and I urge you to as well, march against Monsanto this Saturday, May 21st. This is a march against corporate malfeasance, against corporate lies, the buying of our elected officials, the poisoning of our people and planet, and the bastardization of the name of science into a belief that technology is always right, and that what we concoct is better than what nature concocts, that what we create is science, and that what the planet has spent billions of years creating is not. This is, in other words, a march for science, the science of how we might live with, not destroy nature. This is a march for truth, for our rights and the rights of the planet. To learn more about the march and to find one that's happening in your area, visit marchagainstmonsanto.com with dashes. So, shifting now from science to one of its offspring, technology, let me introduce you to this week's interview. Grayson Earle is a political technologist, if you will. He uses mediums such as video games, video projection, robotics, and things I just clearly don't understand, right out of the gate, like algorithmic audio-visual generation, to promote messages of socio-political change. Perhaps the most well-known or often seen of these iterations is the Illuminator project. As stated on their site, the Illuminator seeks to smash the myths of the information industry and shine a light on the urgent issues of our time. Last week, I sat down with Grayson to talk about the Illuminator project, collaborative efforts in creative activism, and the role of technology in change. Take a look. Talk a little bit about the role of technology with this political activism.
In a lot of ways, I see technology as important in helping us to circumvent certain laws or restrictions. For example, we did this project in Montreal with the Illuminator, where it was after the student movement, and the city had put these laws in place. One of them is now known as P6, which stipulated that you could only have less than 50 people at a protest. And the way around that was you had to give the police your route and like a list of all the people that are going to be involved. And anyway, if you broke this law, you would charge like $500 or something. And so we created like a virtual protest. We projected it into the streets that had more than 50 people, and there's no way to sort of create laws against that, or there aren't any laws against it yet because it's technology and it's new, so it's sort of like able to happen. And yeah, I mean, in general, it helps us to get around certain things. It's a way of trespassing and putting a message onto a building when the owner doesn't want it to be there, but there's no way for them to sort of tell us no, because it's sort of categorized under free speech, at least at this moment. And we're currently involved in a lawsuit against the NYPD because they arrested a few of us for doing this one time at the Metropolitan Museum during the inauguration of David H. Koch's Plaza statue out there. And yeah, they basically arrested us on the grounds that we were doing illegal advertising, but it was clear to us that, we didn't stand to gain anything commercially from what we were doing, and we didn't permanently affix anything to the structure. So it was free speech.
So I'm just curious, how you feel about the issue of whether that be the NSA or the FBI or just government officials in general encroaching on the technological free speech aspect of things.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting. Like, I don't know. I mean, I guess I see it as a new kind of like site to contest. It's interesting, much in the way that, a bunch of people got together and occupied Wall Street. Now there's all these opportunities to sort of occupy these areas that we're not supposed to. Like, for example, there are, and I mean that in the sense of like areas we're not supposed to occupy online. So there's like a list of words that the NSA and Department of Homeland Security created to sort of like, as something to comb through online communications and searches with. And like, after the Boston Marathon bombing, there's this woman in Boston who got a visit from the FBI because she searched for backpack and pressure cooker on the same day. So like these lists are in use. And so there's a project that I worked on called the NSA haiku generator that sort of like asked people to make poems out of these words and then tweet them out. And it sort of acted as a way to like saturate the internet with these sensitive search terms and, thereby sort of grind the surveillance apparatus to a halt, at least momentarily. So I think it's, the creative response should be to just kind of like do things that we're not supposed to, right? It's sort of like what protest is in general. So now we have ways to do that online, and we have to think about more of them, I think.
So in that idea of like this NSA haiku generator that you created, you've also created some apps, like the ones that you can get off of the Illuminator website. Talk a little bit about these apps and what they're used for.
We try and open source all of our software, and we have a couple of things. I mean, most of them deal with projection, and we do this because there's other projection groups around the United States that we're in communication with, and they're often like sort of how do we get started and all this stuff. And a lot of the software that's out there costs money, so we make sort of free versions, and they just allow you to like do things that are as basic as if you're parked across the street but at an angle from the building, you can still project onto that building and see a nice square. To other things that are a little more advanced, like the People's Pad is this software that allows you to sort of write on a piece of paper and then have that be projected onto a wall. If there's any way to show a video of this, it would be really helpful because it's hard to explain. But it kind of allows you to write, it almost looks like someone writing a comic book entry or something, and it goes onto the building. And like with that project in Montreal, we created this thing called the protest generator. So you can like record people on a green screen and then like have a sign making party and sort of like attach the signs to the signs they're holding against the green screen and have them like walk around and like have this protest with sort of any text that you want.
So I'm also curious, you've done everything from, the Koch brothers to the gentrification to the Snowden bust. How do you decide what you're going to be working on? And like, is it based on how easily you can translate that into a few words or an image?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's not about so much about if it'll be easy, but just kind of, I mean, yeah, so much has to do with timing. And if we can respond quickly to something, that's when it seems to jive with people like on social media and in real life. Like they have a really visceral reaction to it, or like an emotional reaction to it, as do we. So if that's possible, then we do that. But a lot of stuff is planned, and it's just kind of like a lot of unions and activists in the New York scene are aware of us, and so they'll kind of let us know if they've got something coming up. And then if we have the time and the people are available, then we'll just sort of do it if we agree with their politics.
So finally, on the website, there's sort of like a pay it forward mentality. The like how to write ups and the apps. Why is that like an important part of your work to have this sort of like now you guys go do it?
Yeah, I think because it's like we try not to. Originally, we were like really adamant about not calling ourselves artists, and I think that this plays into it because it's not about like us. It's just about the movement, and so we want to equip as many people as possible to be able to do this kind of like counter advertising, like counter spectacle work as possible, and like imagining like a 50 city simultaneous projection on one particular issue is like really I think one of the things that we're after in the future, and it would be great if we could help facilitate that in any way by getting people the right equipment, the right software, the right ideas, like the right graphics, whatever they need. So that's why we try and sort of open source what we do.
To learn more about Grayson and his work, check out GraysonEarle.com, and for more on the Illuminator, check out theilluminator.org. Now, before we wrap up this week, let me introduce you to another piece of political technology. And this one, however, is straight low-life scum.
You low-life scum.
So, technology can be awesome, as we've just seen, but it can also be fucking cruel. Video visitation is replacing in-person jail visits with what one reporter called glitchy, expensive, Skype-like video calls. And as with anything else in the prison industrial complex, expensive is the key word. $1 per minute is the typical cost of a video visitation, and this is the quality that you get at that price. Yep, welcome to the new frontier. Over 600 prisons in 46 states have some form of video visitation, and many have completely done away with in-person visits. Their view is that it saves the jail money, i.e. no prison guards required to monitor in-person visits, while making prison telecom companies assloads of cash. The swivel began several years ago, but a significant push happened not long after the FCC proposed a price cap on prison phone calls, which were raking in upwards of $14 a minute. A minute per prison phone call. And as these stats put together by Mike.com show, 34% of families go into debt just trying to stay in touch with an inmate. And while the FCC battles lawyers from prison telecom companies such as GTL and Securus, these price cap regulations are on hold, with corporate lawyers claiming that this regulatory agency overstepped its bounds by regulating. Meanwhile, any money that those companies claim they're going to lose through phone call price caps is more than subsidized by video visitation, particularly since, unlike phone calls, video visitation is in many cases the only form of contact inmates can have with the outside world. But for some, it's not only cost prohibitive, it can also include waiting an hour in line to use. Not easy for lower income families working several jobs to get by. And this breeds yet another problem. In 2014, Jorge Renaud was released from prison after spending his second stint incarcerated with only video visitation as an option. Once released, he decided to dig deeper into the effects of video visitation on the inmates, not just mentally, but physically. What he found supports Renaud's own feelings that a flickering damn screen cannot replace a face-to-face meeting. Not only did inmate-on-inmate violence rise significantly after in-person visitation ended, but recidivism did as well. But this is technically old news. A decade's worth of research before Renaud shows that visitation significantly decreases the risk of recidivism, and that reforming prison visitation policies by making them more visitor-friendly could yield public safety benefits by helping offenders establish a continuum of social support from prison to the community. And we shouldn't really be shocked by these findings. After all, human connection is one of our goddamn primary needs, right after food, water, and shelter. Ultimately, video visitation is just another boiling blister on the face of the prison industrial complex. A for-profit system that engages in inhumane, dystopian, and regressive methods, much like the healthcare system, hoping that people will just keep coming back. As Jana Sims, who supported Jorge Renaud when he was in jail, said, if we don't want them to be worse off when they come back, we have to care about how we treat them in prisons and in jails. And this worse off isn't just about them personally, it's about our society as a whole. More violence in jail will obviously translate to more violence in the street. More antisocial behavior in jail will only result in more difficulties in the communities. For the sake of people on the inside and on the outside, if you want to be a selfish prick, we have to fight for jails to be centers of rehabilitation, not centers of hate, resentment, and crime 101. Through his research and advocacy, Jorge Renaud managed to get legislation passed to reinstate in-person visits at the county jail in Texas where he was held. And similar legislation is on the books in several states, and of course, prison reform advocacy is an ongoing battle all over the country. So, to learn more about Jorge and the organization that he works with, Grassroots Leadership, visit grassrootsleadership.org. And that will do it for this week's Dose of Dissent. Thank you so much for watching, and please do spread and share this with all of your friends, foes, and people you don't know. Check out the last slide to see all of the sites that I mentioned in the show, and be sure to follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, and subscribe on YouTube. From an appropriately overcast Devil's Den, good night and act out. And real quick, to keep independent, non-corporatized media like this show going, donate at Occupy.com/donate. If you'd like to donate directly to Act Out, visit Patreon.com/actout.